Gacha sets are a core part of the Battle Cats. You roll them to get gacha units, including rares, super rares, ubers, and legend rares. Of course, while most rares and super rares are the same in each banner, ubers are what tend to differentiate sets between each other. Each gacha banner comes with different ubers, and the selection of ubers they provide are what define the set. For example, Iron Legion is specifically catered towards providing units which target and counter zombie enemies. Or maybe you'll roll a set like Galaxy Gals, which don't have a common trait target but have lots of good generalist ubers. A common debate that you see is which set is the best one, and while this is typically between the Almighties and the Dynamites, I've decided to cover the opposite. Which gacha banner is the absolute worst one? Technically speaking, if we do look at all gacha banners in the entire game, then the worst one belongs to collabs, some of which are generally underpowered due to age. Survive Mola Mola's banner only features a single uber, Mola King, who is a very risky high-range backliner uber with okay-ish stats and a crazy dodge ability. While he isn't the worst unit ever, he is far from the best. The strongest unit you'll ever roll from this banner is Mola King, but at least the weakest unit you'll get is also Mola King. Princess Punt's banner features some of the worst ubers in the entire game, with pretty much all of them being useless. There's not a single reason to roll this banner outside of collection. But let's exclude collab here for a more interesting conversation. Naturally, with collab out of the way, seasonal banners are next. Xmas Gals is an infamous one for having tons of ubers which were left behind to rot, without talents and some without even true forms. Being knockoffs of main banner ubers, they were an afterthought for balancing and as a result are very weak compared to normal ubers. You should never roll Xmas Gals for reasons besides collection, but let's also exclude seasonal banners and start to answer the question people really want to know when they talk about the worst gacha banner, which is of course the worst regular gacha banner. While sets like Almighties and Dynamites battle for the top spot, many of the regular sets are pretty balanced and about average. Dark Heroes and Vajiras are usually higher up, and sets like Dragon Emperors and Galaxy Gals are treated lower. If you were to ask most people, they would call Tales of the Neko Luga as the worst banner in the game, and it's not hard to see why. Being the first banner, the unit classes are fairly outdated for the meta we have now, including some of the weakest ubers in the game period, like Papa Luga. If you roll Neko Lugas, which you really shouldn't, you have a high chance of getting a unit that isn't all that great. But I view there to be a set even less worth rolling than the Lugas, which is a set that some people actually do end up rolling. It's a set that features an incredibly weak array of ubers, some of which who fail to do their only job, as well as having the banner be completely outclassed by a different one. I'm talking about the Elemental Pixies, the worst gacha banner in the Battle Cats. The Elemental Pixies Guardians of Nature banner was added in version 6.5, alongside the new Cats of the Cosmos expansion. All fit with anti-alien abilities, they were intended to counter the new expansion, as well as aliens in the game as a whole. Looking at them from a distance, the Pixies don't seem that bad. Generally speaking, they have less generalist damage output and range than most other ubers, but with a somewhat faster cooldown, shorter than typical backliners but slower than Dynamites. All Pixies have three common things that define the set. The first is that they all have alien target and the resist ability, the second is that they are all warp immune, and the third is that they all have barrier breaker at a 100% chance in their second and third forms. These sets of abilities make them especially well catered towards aliens, at least on paper. But instead of generalizing, let's inspect each individual uber for all the value they provide. Oh yeah, and we're ignoring first form Pixies because all of them are way worse than their later forms. Bora is a Pixie with all the usual abilities alongside massive damage. Base stats are pretty usual for a Pixie, average health, lower DPS and range, but faster cooldown. It's clear that Bora's role is an alien nuker due to his massive damage ability, but how well actually is he against aliens? Well, due to a combination of decent stats, massive damage, and resist for intercepting aliens easier, he's actually quite a good alien nuker. Almost all alien threats get destroyed pretty easily by Bora, meaning he's rather good at his niche. But this is where the good news ends, because that's all Bora does. Use him against non-aliens and he won't provide much value. I know what you're thinking. It's weird to compare Bora, an anti-alien specialist, to other Ubers based on general stats, but what I'm trying to say here is that Bora doesn't provide any other use besides nuking aliens. When you compare him to other alien nukers, we see that they all provide additional value. Aphrodite is both an alien nuker like Bora, but also an LD sniper unit. Catman hits many more traits than just alien, and this goes for almost every other alien nuker in the game. They almost always have additional utility, or just hit more target traits, providing more value than Bora does. And even if they don't, they will most certainly have better generalist stats than Bora. Bora has a strength and talent that activates on his last knockback, but even then it isn't changing much for him. And the worst part is that despite being made for nuking aliens, he isn't even the best at it. Strictly talking about alien nuking, Mad Dr. Clay is much better at doing exactly what Bora does, while someone like Makako does nuke damage similar to Bora, but with the additional utility of a guaranteed long slow and better stats overall. Aphrodite and Saki have a better matchup spread against alien backliners, which tend to be the more problematic enemies. At the end of the day though, Bora still accomplishes what he set out to do with success. He still nukes aliens well, and while he doesn't do anything else of value, that is still enough for him to be at least an okay addition to the player's arsenal. I give him a low B. Most Ubers in the game are going to be more valuable than Bora is. And the worst part about this is that the vast majority of Pixies are either on par or much worse than Bora as units. Misley is next, who has guaranteed knockback and slow. Famous for her so-called Misley syndrome, an idea where knocking back units can lead to your own demise, she is pretty well known in the community. I made an entire video exploring Misley syndrome before, but looking at the unit herself, Misley isn't a great unit. Its combination of knockback and slow makes her a risky unit to use at times, which makes it hard to bring her niche out. But the so-called Misley syndrome isn't the worst part about her. It's simply the fact that no one needs Misley. When it comes to alien crowd control, Seafarer alone is almost enough for every alien stage in the game. For Into the Future bosses, Psycho Cat works as well. When you look at most cases of alien backliners in stages, usually you don't want to knock back and slow them, but rather just kill them outright. Misley doesn't contribute towards making any of these alien stages easier, but instead provides no value at all. While she can combo well with other Ubers like Aphrodite, it's not like Aphrodite needs a Misley in order to function well. What we have here is a unit that not only has poor generalist stats like most Pixies, but also lacks a niche with any kind of value, outside of extremely impractical situations. Misley is practically useless, and for that reason, I'll give her a D tier. Misley is awesome though, and the coolest Pixie, so she gets a very special D tier. Next up is Air, whose specialty is being an LD attacker. Unfortunately, a lack of any real anti-alien ability makes him pretty much useless. He's pretty good at destroying barriers with his reach, but this role of an LD unit isn't particularly important in the slightest. While his LD attacker stats aren't the worst, we already have tons of great LD in the modern meta with units like Courier, Fiend, Housewife, Ural, and more. He gets the weaken ability with talents, and while it does sound decent on paper, it's still not too impactful or worth the cost. Another major problem with Air is that he's not very good at clearing cats of the cosmos, which should be the major use for a Pixie. He'll struggle to contribute much besides breaking barriers on most of the stages there, and is just not very useful at all. There's really not much else to say about Air. He's one of the worst non-collab or seasonal Ubers in the game, or well, that was until his Ultra form. Air Vontex does guaranteed knockback against aliens every hit, and with his fast attack rate in LD, juggles all aliens on the field incredibly well. He's probably the single best non-DPS answer to aliens in the game, but at the same time, spending 15 Dark Eyes just to get a good alien answer is probably not worth it for most people, especially since there are more useful ultra forms a player can get. Dioramos, for example, completely destroys aliens on top of also targeting angels and having extremely good stats across the board. Overall, Air isn't the greatest Uber, and you can safely consider him a dead pull if you happen to roll him, D tier. Volta does a guaranteed freeze with every hit, and stands at a nice 400 range, which makes it easier for him to outrange and freeze enemies that something like Seafarer can't. Ursa Major is a good example of an enemy where Volta's range allows him to work better than Seafarer would. While this is good on paper, it really isn't all that needed since Seafarer covers the majority of aliens similarly well, sometimes even performing better due to having a chance at permafreeze without needing to wait the time Volta would for a second Volta. Volta is better against Mesocosmocyclones due to the resist, but outside of that he's pretty replaceable in role and doesn't contribute more than you would already accomplish with Seafarer. While it is more consistent to run both than just one, that consistency isn't really needed since either Volta or Seafarers alone is good enough for most stages. There are a few more niche applications, such as cheesing Speechless Tongues or freezing Baron Hippo, but those stages are both late game, meaning they fall victim to Soapcat, which eliminates the need for Volta in the first place. Overall, not the worst unit, and a pretty effective crowd control towards aliens, but replaceable in role and does not provide any other usage. I'll give Volta a B- because of these reasons. Gravy is a tanky unit with guaranteed chance to do a level 4 wave. With 120,000 health at just level 30, when you add his resist and warp immune, he's a very nice tank for aliens. His damage output is also very good. Due to the guaranteed wave, he has an effective 10,000 generalist DPS at just level 30. Gravy is arguably different from all other Pixies in a sense because he is the only one with actually good generalist stats. With a decently fast cooldown and low cost, it is a viable move to bring Gravy on general tanking stages or mid-ranger stages, and have him put in quite a bit of damage on the enemies. 30,000 damage a wave is more than enough to easily clear out annoying peons like Brawlos and Pigeons, and the high reach allows him to chip the backline quite effectively. His talents give him Curse and Knockback Immune, as well as Target Relic, further expanding his niche. Knockback Immune in particular is very nice on a tank as well. For most stages in the game, you can use him as a general tank or mid-ranger role and get pretty good results. He's overall a very solid unit that does well both generally and in his own niche. Gravy earns a low A tier for his work. Nice job, Gravy. You're the best Pixie. Unfortunately, that means that everyone else in the set is worse than an Uber who is just pretty good and not broken tier. Yamy is a unit whose value is highly debated due to his strange build. He's meant to be a ranged tank for Alien and Aku that does weaken for support, but also has the wave blocker ability. Standing at 340 range, and with a pretty fast cooldown for an Uber, Yamy is widely considered to be the best ranged wave blocker in the game. While I do agree with this sentiment, the value of a ranged wave blocker isn't as big as some people make it out to be. Sure, it does completely neuter and destroy most wave stages in the game, but Octopus Cat is usually enough for these stages, especially when paired alongside Dancer, Mushroom, and other anti-wave answers. Luckily, Yamy still has bright moments as a wave blocker. On stages like Blessing level max, Yamy can wave block the Mr. Mers and Boar Juniors while standing at a safe range, and not being warped away by XCL due to his warp immune. As for tanking roles, he's pretty decent at not dying, but his support weakens aren't the most impactful on Alien or Aku stages. He might still be useful on rare occasion, but don't expect him to give you free wins everywhere. It's also of note that Yamy has a 2-slot resist M combo with Tourist, which is actually pretty impactful for just 2 slots. If you're running a resist or tanker strategy, try bringing this combo. It's actually more impactful than you think. While his wave blocker role is pretty good, it's not groundbreaking, and his tanking niche isn't that groundbreaking either. He's a nice combo, but that's more of a bonus. About a B tier Uber. Pretty average, but he's not really that powerful compared to around half the Ubers in the game. Bazana is a mid-ranged Uber with multi-hit, guaranteed slow, and targets both aliens and zombies. This unit used to be one of the worst Ubers in the game, until True Form, where she is now Still one of the worst Ubers in the game. Terrible generalist stats, awkward multi-hit, and her slow only applies on the very last hit. Her role at crowd controlling aliens and zombies at mid-range is easily outclassed by Seafarer and Housewife, and even her toxic immunity isn't all that useful. Sure, she lives against Big Pang Z, but slowing him down isn't going to make the difference between you losing and winning. She is a surprisingly good meat shield against Zolos though, so that's something. But Bazana is a unit that pretty much provides nothing useful to most players, and without good general stats or an actually useful niche, this unit might be the most useless Pixie there is. Or well, there's somehow competition for this title, which makes this set just look all the much worse. Tekachi is the newest Pixie, and has no true form. He targets Alien, Angel, and Floating, acting as a tanker role and has 10% dodge. This dodge is a minor bonus to his tanking capabilities, which are pretty good. The problem with Tekachi is his fundamentals. In order for a tank to actually provide value, they have to do one of three things. They either dish out enough damage to hard-to-reach enemies, apply status effects to those enemies to make them easier to counter, or act as a meat shield when traditional meat shields are not effective. Tekachi has terrible damage output, no status effects, and is competing with the likes of Ramen for Angels, Octo for Floatings, and the wide variety of anti-alien meat shields for that trait. He's simply not useful because we already have fantastic options for the role that he does, making him again practically useless for most players of the game. Until he does get a true form, Tekachi sits at the bottom next to a few other Pixies, all of them having hardly any value at all. That's all the Ubers for now, but this set does have a legend rare, which is Lumina. Just a reminder, but you should never roll a set for the legend rare in it, if that wasn't obvious enough. You should only be directly rolling a set if it has guaranteed for consistent Ubers. And for Pixies, I would avoid rolling this set entirely, which means Lumina is a unit you probably shouldn't be going for, unless another banner with actually good units happens to have a legend rare drop chance for Pixies. But anyways, Lumina is a ranged tanker with decent generalist stats. Does she tank aliens well? Yes. Is this useful? Kind of. Similarly to Gravi, due to having damage and also a support weaken, she's a very nice unit to intercept aliens. Her fast speed also makes her nice for cheesing stages like Speechless Tongues. However, she does have direct competition with Soapcat, who tanks aliens and weakens them as well. While Lumina is stronger at the role, it's not like there's an alien tanking stage where Soap isn't enough to win, so that diminishes the role she has by quite a bit. Generalist stats wise, she's decently powerful but nothing impressive. High health, decent DPS, and 375 range make her an alright addition to stages where she can outrange most enemies. I wouldn't say she's as useful generally as Gravi due to the lack of the wave roll, but she still is usable and shines on mid-ranger stages, especially if the stage requires bulky attackers to shrug off weak hits. Lumina is a solid unit, and although not groundbreaking, is a decent addition to most players' arsenals. B+, but let's be honest, you shouldn't be having this unit anyways. So looking at our Pixies, we notice something unusual. Where's the broken wildcard unit that appears in most sets? Dynamites has Balrog, Almighty's has Kronos, War God has Yukimura, but the best Uber in Pixies is Gravi, who is good but definitely not gonna hard carry you throughout the entire game. Looking at how many of the units here are in lower tiers, it's basically a coin flip on whether you get complete garbage or just a half decent unit from this set. Now that we've finished taking an overview of the units themselves, let's get into the three main reasons why Pixies are the worst normal set in the game. The first and most obvious one is just what we discovered. Pixies do not have good overall quality when it comes to the units they provide, to where other sets are both much more consistent and have higher peaks. Sets like Dynamites and Almighties are filled with strong, amazing, and even game-breaking Ubers. You have a much higher chance of getting something useful if you roll these sets instead of Pixies, being that we're looking for the consistent aspect of the set, or their alien niche, to be a viable reason to roll them at all. But now we reach our second reason, which is that their niche isn't that valuable in the first place because most aliens aren't that hard to counter. What do I mean by this? Well, most of the notoriously difficult stages or roadblocks a player will have to go against aren't alien stages. For the ones that are, the player's non-uber anti-aliens like Seafair, and for later parts of the game, Soap and Royal Guard are more than enough to beat all the hard alien stages in the game without much trouble. There are a few stages which are still very challenging, like Glass Slippers, but pretty much any alien nuker or Ursa Major counter in the game is enough to take out all the difficulty in that stage. When it comes to more mid-game oriented stages, they are typically easy backliner stages or restriction stages in Cats of the Cosmos. For specifically Cats of the Cosmos, again, almost any anti-alien uber is enough to negate all the difficulty, making the Pixies' niches not very special. Cats of the Cosmos also isn't that difficult to do normally unless you rush it, apart from a few select stages. And for those select stages like Skelling and Andromeda 3, they are still doable without ubers fairly easily if you just search a guide. Some of the Pixies also don't even help you with Cats of the Cosmos that much, like Air, Bazana, or Tekachi. And really, outside of Cat God, which drops from Cats of the Cosmos 2, the main reason why you want to clear Cats of the Cosmos 3 fast is to be able to play late game start alien stages, which give you drops that are only useful if you're at a point of the game where your other units are decently leveled as well, making a Pixie Cats of the Cosmos 3 rush kind of an irrelevant move. And finally, the third reason why Pixies are the worst set by far is that they are completely outclassed by a different set, being Dark Heroes. Dark Heroes is a set focused on countering aliens, and were made to help the player clear into the future. They are actually pretty strong units, and one of the most consistently good sets overall. Almost everything here will help you get past Into the Future and Cats of the Cosmos, while also providing even more niche and generalist value. Most units here have great base stats, making them better generally than Pixies. Dark Heroes also have a gimmick where changing forms allows units to change abilities, such as targeting different traits or having different roles. Catman can not only nuke aliens, but also floatings, angels, and relics when you account all his different forms. Warlock, Saki, and Hayabusa also have useful trait target changes that make them versatile. The set also has a good amount of standout units. Bigler has the best research combo in the game, a 2-slot Research M with pretty decent units inside of it, allowing you to save slots or stack even more research than you were able to before. Saki and Claire are powerful multi-trait attackers that can be used in many different stages to answer a large variety of threats. And the best one of them all, Thunderjack is a unit with broken stats that can bully 3 different traits into being stun-locked, on top of just doing well in any situation due to his incredible DPS and good HP as a rusher. He's one of the best ubers in the entire game when you exclude fests, and has potential to only get even stronger because he doesn't even have a true form yet. So yeah, not only are Pixies incredibly weak and not useful in their niche, but their entire existence is meaningless when a set that does everything the Pixies wanted to, on top of doing even more, already exists. Now we should be done here, but I'll make a brief section on a certain other set that most people would say is worse than Pixies. That of course is the Neko Lugas, which have tons of wacky and extremely fragile units that don't always contribute much. And honestly, while Lugas definitely is a bad set, in a way, they are kind of underrated. Lufalan is a broken unit that invalidates so many stages in the game that it's funny. Having a unit this good in Lugas already gives it more of a reason to roll than Pixies. Looking at other units, Assassin Lan and Ballaluga are decent support picks which you can bring to many stages due to their high range. They aren't going to hard carry stages, but their general support can provide assistance on a ton of them in the game. Kaluga is a usable, albeit not amazing sniper unit that stands at a far range, and Nobeluga is a surprisingly strong LD unit with great range and pierce, who is quite underrated in my opinion. Although his DPS isn't the highest, it's still useful for dealing with opposing backlines, and the higher range makes him much better generally than something like Air would ever be. Shishilan Pasilan has decent generalist stats and damage output, but does suffer from his large knockback count leading to a lot of stages countering him. He's still a decent option on a good amount if you play them correctly. As for the rest, while Neko Luga, Kubi Luga, Papa Luga, and Furrylan are pretty garbage, It's not like Pixies doesn't have 4 completely garbage units as well. Some of these units also have niche use cases as well. Furryland has a nice worker startup combo, Neko Luga and Kubi Luga can be used for extra knockbacks in certain stages that also hit backliners, and Papa Luga, as terrible as he is, can at least be used as backline DPS on Surge stages if you happen to not have many Surge immune units. Yeah, he's still terrible, but if you asked me whether I would get more use out of him or a unit like Bazana, I'd personally take Papa Luga. Now it is important to know that these Luga units are pretty difficult to use correctly, as they are extremely fragile and inexperienced players can get them killed quite easily. They come packed with tons of weaknesses, but if you do know how to use them correctly, they can actually have decent impact on stages in the game, with a certain level of potential that bottom tier Pixies simply don't have. Basically, Neko Lugas still suck, but the Pixies suck even more to the point where not even the most experienced players can find good uses out of them. So yeah, that's basically my reasoning on why the Elemental Pixies are the worst normal set in the Battle Cats. While this might be a hot take, it might also not be because I've seen a fair amount of people who also have this consensus. Let me know in the comments if you agreed that Pixies are the worst normal set, or if you think a different one like Lugas is worse. Regardless though, there is still one reason to roll Pixies despite everything I said. If you just like their design and think they are cool, then go ahead and roll for them. At the end of the day, you're the player choosing how to play the game, and you don't need to play super optimally and always roll the best banners. While that is helpful if you already have what you need to finish the game, or simply don't need the aid of any more broken Ubers, then just go ahead and roll whichever set has your favorite units. Although this does come with some risks, so if you are new or inexperienced, I would recommend sticking to the good banners. That's all I have to say now, and remember kids, keep your Pixie count low. I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.